In 1971, Richard Nixon launched the war on drugs. Across the United States, the same scenes were repeated: drug busts, mass arrests, and prison sentences. Ex-soldiers back from Vietnam were systematically tested and weaned off. The world's leading producer of heroin, France, was in Washington's sights. The Corsican Mafia, the pillar of the French Connection, was the #1 target.
For 20 years, the Corsican mob prospered due to denial, impunity, and protection. Then suddenly, Nixon thumped his fist on the table.
France witnessed its first deaths by overdose. Heroin became a major public health issue. French President Georges Pompidou welcomed Nixon's pressure. His Secret Service was beyond control. The drug rings needed to be broken up.
With the help of the Americans, who sent machines, cars, and equipment, and who financed the operations, it became possible to disband parts of the drug syndicate and close down the clandestine laboratories.
Washington sent agents from its brand new Drug Enforcement Administration. Specializing in intelligence, the DEA partnered the French police in its investigations. Within 5 years, 3,010 traffickers and dealers were arrested, and the chemists of the Corsican Mafia fled. The French Connection was dismantled.
Nixon's drug war was, in one sense, brilliantly successful. He combines diplomacy at the highest level with the enforcement activities of the Drug Enforcement Administration to concentrate the full power of the United States against narcotics.
The first battle was won. But in the mid-1970s, the drug market exploded across the globe as consumption reached unprecedented levels. To conquer this market, a new generation of traffickers would build powerful criminal organizations headed by the so-called drug lords. Through them, 4 tactical axes of power emerged, which would turn drug trafficking into a globalized industry.
Organized crime is the most agile business in the world. You squeeze it, you pressure it, it will simply adapt to the existing conditions. It's like water, it follows the path of least resistance, and it will always move around obstacles.
From the ashes of the old world, drug traffic rose and reorganized at lightning speed. In Mexico, those who had been farming poppies and marijuana for 20 years were the first to understand.
The elimination of the French Connection was an amazing opportunity for Mexican farming communities. The price of raw opium quadrupled in just a few months.
New poppy fields were hastily planted in the fertile mountains of Sinaloa. The DEA launched a huge operation with the Mexican army. In 1976, Washington supplied all kinds of herbicides to spray over the poppy and marijuana fields. Whole villages were forced to migrate. Small producers and smugglers were jailed.
The farmers who managed to survive did so by being better negotiators and by being more inventive, both in their produce and in the way they trafficked it.
The survivors of this vast operation shifted their production and organized themselves under the leadership of a trafficker from a poor family in Sinaloa, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo.
He's a very interesting guy. He was a former federal policeman, so he understood the workings of the police. Very important to any drug trafficker. He also was, for a time, a bodyguard to the governor of Sinaloa. So he understood the political world. And he understood the drug trafficking world. So if you've got a foot in those three worlds, that's a recipe for success.
Felix Gallardo based himself in Mexico's second largest city, Guadalajara. By uniting the smartest producers and traffickers, he would gain control of nearly all of the country's heroin and marijuana markets. The first big Mexican drug cartel was born. The Guadalajara cartel soon amassed a colossal fortune.
Felix Gallardo became a member of the executive committee of a bank where he was able to massively launder all the profits of his and his cartel members' international trafficking.
Through his bank, Felix Gallardo reinvested his money in legal activities. He became a respected businessman and delighted in rubbing shoulders with Mexican high society. The crackdown carried out a few years earlier had failed to curb the rise of the first Mexican drug lord. Worse still, it actually facilitated it.
The more law enforcement, the more natural selection you have. It's the survival of the fittest. It's the drug traffickers that are most capable of evading law enforcement, that have the greatest capacity to outcompete their rivals, whether through smartness or through aggression, and that have the greatest capacity to corrupt at least local officials that survive the fight.
As heroin continued to flow onto the American market, another drug surfaced deep within the Andes: cocaine. In Peru and Bolivia, where the coca leaf had been used for millennia to ward off hunger and altitude sickness, chemistry waved its magic wand.
When you see how this drug is made, it doesn't give you the desire to try it. The coca leaves are macerated for 3 days in kerosene. The concoction is mixed with lime and left to macerate again. The stench is revolting. This fearsome chemistry continues with additions of acid, ether, and acetone.
In the early 70s, a gram of coke sold in the United States for $700. Extremely rare, the white powder lit up the world of finance, the wolves of Wall Street and the jet set. It was the drug of triumphant capitalism, the drug of the successful.
There was actually a Time magazine cover, the champagne of drugs. Here's a wonderful drug that you can get high on, and it's not addictive. Wrong. Dead wrong. But as a result, there are political consequences. The DEA was instructed, you will devote all your investigative effort toward heroin. You will not devote investigative effort to cocaine trafficking.
The path was open for the large-scale control of this new market. In Colombia, a handful of criminals began production without encountering the slightest obstacle. A poor country, Colombia was a vast territory of jungles and mountains which escaped all state control. There the traffickers were kings.
Colombia is traditionally a very libertarian country. Its people naturally and instinctively reject all concentration of power. It's very clear to see that they totally reject all forms of authority.
In the early 1970s, Colombian traffickers bought cocaine in Bolivia and Peru and smuggled it into the United States. The frenzied American market brought them mind-boggling profits. In Medellin, a young trafficker convinced other criminals to step up a level. Together, they would increase deliveries and seize control of the cocaine market. This was the birth of the Medellin cartel.
Pablo Escobar was the enforcer. Every drug trafficker had to pay him a percentage. And he provided a series of services in exchange for that percentage. One, he guaranteed loads. So he would put together loads from various different traffickers, and then he would ensure they were delivered to the United States. If a shipment was lost, he would make it up. He didn't invent cocaine trafficking, he industrialized it and moved it to this enormous scale.
The Medellin cartel purchased a fleet of aircraft and began smuggling tons of cocaine into southern Florida. In Miami, drug dealers waged their own war for control. America discovered the bloody face of cocaine.
Ralph, the shootout occurred at about 2:30 this afternoon when two or more Latin males entered the Crown Liquor Store here on the west end of the Dadeland Mall. They were followed by two or three other Latin males, and then the shooting began.
Around Dade County, the bodies are piling up almost faster than they can be counted. Yesterday, 2 men were killed in Medley when they threatened an armed man. In a bloody 24-hour stretch, both Dade County and
aliens. There have been so many murders throughout greater Miami lately that a special refrigerated truck is now being used by the Dade Medical Examiner's office to store all the bodies.
Shocked by the scale of the violence, the DEA traced the problem back to Colombia. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter imposed an extradition treaty on the Colombian government. All traffickers arrested by the police in Colombia would henceforth be tried and jailed in the United States. Escobar realized the threat. To stop Parliament from ratifying the treaty, he handsomely paid off a large number of politicians. But he wanted further guarantees. In 1982, aged 33, Escobar entered politics himself, running as a wealthy businessman. He was elected as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives.
El Tratado de Extradición viola la Constitución colombiana en 23 artículos, atenta contra los derechos humanos porque todo el pueblo colombiano está contra él y además porque es injusto.
From then on, money was no longer his only goal. He started dreaming of controlling the country. Power became his main objective.
Behind this man who owned one of the biggest drug businesses in the world was a killer, and a man who was hungry for power. He wanted to become president of this country.
Having infiltrated the Colombian democracy, Pablo Escobar succeeded in having the extradition treaty blocked. In the United States, nobody imagined that this young politician was none other than he who had turned cocaine into a powerful industry. The industrialization of drugs was also ongoing in Asia. After the Vietnam War and the departure of American GIs, Thailand sailed alone in a sea of red. The kingdom feared communist incursions into its territory. A young warlord would take advantage of this new geopolitical order. He went by the name of Kun Sa, the Prince of Prosperity.
Kun Sa is an extraordinary figure. Kun Sa is of that kind. An inconsequential individual who would have had a life as a market trader or a farmer or a localized businessman who gets transformed into a man of extraordinary power.
Born in Burma, and having received military training as a youngster, he became a militiaman in the pay of the ruthless Burmese dictatorship. Kun Sa then founded his own army financed by the opium trade. Soon at the head of 2,000 armed men, he crossed the border and sold his services to the powers that be in Thailand.
He was pretty good at sensing where the power lay and the maximum amount of resources he could extract from the power. Arms, immunity, the right to traffic.
The Kingdom of Thailand welcomed Khun Sa with open arms. With his armed men, he would defend the border against communist incursions. In exchange, the so-called Prince of Prosperity was given carte blanche for his trafficking. His opium caravans freely travelled across borders.
The Thai Supreme Command had base camps for them, protected them, and of course received a percentage of their profits. Khun Sa built a very large heroin laboratory, and he became quite a powerful drug lord.
Khun Sa was picked up on the DEA radar, but Thailand refused to hand over its precious ally to Washington. Faced with this stalemate, the members of the American Congress tried a different approach and sent one of their emissaries to negotiate with Khun Sa, as the British documentary maker Adrian Cowell looked on.
As we had introduced Joe Nellis, Chief Counsel of the Congressional Committee, we were allowed to film this historic meeting.
Only the President and the administration has the authority to make agreements concerning the purchase of opium. Let me ask Khun Sa, what would have to be done to eliminate opium production in the Shan states?
มันคือถามเจ้าเขาว่านังหือยาพินได้หายกว่าทั้งหมดอำนั้นก็หายกว่ากำนำเลยค่ะซ้ำจอยบ้านกุนเมืองคือกุนเมืองเฮาเนี่ยฮู้ว่ายาพินดี We want you to help make contact to the persons who can come and collect all the opium grown in our country either to throw it or to burn it.
In this game of diplomacy, Khun Sa didn't present himself as a drug trafficker, but as a defender of his people, the Shan, who were being brutally repressed in Burma. Shan State was also the main opium production area in the Golden Triangle, a coveted region in a constant state of war.
Certainly in his group, in his army, there were people with strong Shan political objectives. But there were also people in his group with many economic objectives. And Khun Sa was very smart in sort of balancing these two groups in his own army. Publicly saying, I'm fighting for Shan political rights, at the same time making most of the money of the drug trade and becoming deeply involved in it. And he was very good at it.
Khun Sa boasted that he was powerful enough to assemble all the opium production of Shan State and transfer it to the United States in exchange of a few $1 million with which he could help his people. The proposal made its way to the White House, but Washington preferred strong-arm tactics. To eradicate opium from the Golden Triangle, the US armed the Burmese military and its bloodthirsty generals. American helicopters failed to destroy a single opium field, instead firing on rebelling minorities. The Prince of Prosperity could continue his rise as opium continued to make its way to his laboratories. Protected in Thailand, he stepped up production and was given a new nickname, the King of Heroin. Meanwhile, in Europe. In the mid-1970s, a small group of Cosa Nostra mobsters hired the former French Connection chemists. Known as the Godfathers of Palermo, they brought in opium from the Middle East to supply their illicit labs on the Sicilian coast. The Godfathers set up a distribution network in the United States in pizza restaurants in the New York area, soon baptized by the FBI as the Pizza Connection. Very soon, the sums of money involved became astronomical. Sicilian banks were unable to soak up all the cash generated by the traffic.
The local Sicilian banking system exploded, so some of this money made its way to countries with strict banking secrecy policies, such as Switzerland, and a whole system in place to cover any tracks.
Since the early 20th century, a parallel financial system has been put in place to get around the tax laws of Western nations. And mobsters realized, once they started earning big bucks, that this system worked wonders for them. The mafia didn't create this capitalist financial system. Everything was organized so that tax evasion remained secret.
In Sicily, the nouveau riche of the mafia showed off their luxury cars and private yachts. The other mafia families who weren't rolling in this new money were infuriated. But the Godfathers of Palermo didn't care. They were protected by fearsome henchmen. From the small village of Corleone, their leader, Toto Riina, was the bloodthirstiest killer ever recruited by Cosa Nostra.
For Riina, killing a man was as easy as lighting a cigarette. When something didn't suit him, he'd say, "We'll kill him." Nobody dared to upset Riina, because if he did, he knew he wouldn't be going home for dinner.
The Godfathers of Palermo saw Riina as a brainless psychopath. But instead of wiping out the families that were angry with Cosa Nostra, Toto Riina united them to grow in strength. The various families provided him with dozens of new killers.
In April 1981, what was mistakenly called the Mafia War broke out. It wasn't a war at all. A war presupposes two armies going face to face and the strongest winning. Here, there was only one army, Riina's. This was a liquidation.
He killed people on the street, left their bodies outside police stations, carried out spectacular executions. Whereas the old-school Sicilian mafia generally used the so-called lupata bianca, white wolf, meaning a murder with no body, so that doubt lingers. Of course he's not dead. He's gone to the United States.
Toto Riina left 2,000 corpses in his wake and became head of Cosa Nostra. Under his reign, dizzied by the phenomenal sums of money brought in by heroin, the Sicilian mob went a step too far. In 1982, the Communist Party parliamentarian Pio La Torre drafted an anti-mafia bill. A few weeks later, he was assassinated.
Previously, when everything was done clandestinely, when there was no spotlights, a large part of the government turned a blind eye, if I can use such a euphemism. Thanks to Riina, or rather due to him, nobody could look away anymore. The state needed to send out a strong signal that it was present and intended to riposte.
The day after La Torre's death, a new governor was appointed in Sicily, a man known for his fight against terrorism, General Dalla Chiesa. He was in turn assassinated.
In the 1980s, Toto Riina adopted a kind of hubris and believed he could become the boss of bosses. Added to that was his totally crazy idea that he was capable of rivaling the state. He has even been attributed with saying this: "In Sicily, I am the state."
With this escalation of violence, politicians were gripped by fear. Even the most corrupt among them. Parliament passed the Assassinated Communist Party Members' Bill, and the word mafia entered Italian criminal law for the first time. The enemy had been identified. the first drug labs were dismantled and dozens of low-ranking mafiosi were arrested, but more would be needed to rock the organization. Cosa Nostra's white powder was flooding New York. In 1982, the Big Apple accounted for half of the United States' 200,000 heroin addicts. For President Reagan, the drug challenge was even greater than the one Nixon had faced. Especially since a new epidemic was spreading, the country now counted 10 million users of cocaine. The president mobilized his special forces in Florida. The Medellin cartel suffered severe losses. Escobar realized he had to find new routes into the States. And that's how, in 1984, somewhere in Mexico, the Medellin cartel met the Guadalajara cartel.
The Colombians thought, hey, if we don't move drugs into the United States, then maybe the DEA won't come for us. If we sell it to the Mexicans, then surely the DEA will just chase the Mexicans, which was rather flawed thinking because judicially, if you're involved in any link in the drug chain, you can be prosecuted.
They joined forces with the Colombians to transport the cocaine and offered them Mexico's greatest asset for narco-trafficking, its border with the United States, which is impossible to control.
And then the Colombians come in and say, well, we need you to move tons and tons and tons of cocaine.
The Mexican traffickers kept all of their promises, and tons of cocaine crossed the border into the United States. The Guadalajara cartel became almighty. In the fall of 1984, the DEA still hadn't worked out what had just happened. One of its agents, Enrique Camarena, discovered a vast marijuana plantation, hundreds of hectares, all immediately destroyed. A few months later, DEA agent Enrique Camarena disappeared.
We didn't know what had happened to our agent, what had happened to Agent Camarena. We didn't know. We couldn't get a straight answer from the Mexican government. And that was when the border was shut down, the Mexican government literally told the traffickers, we have to produce the body, because they knew he was dead.
Enrique Camarena's atrociously mutilated body was finally found. It was discovered later that the special agent had been kidnapped by the Mexican police with the complicity of the Mexican Secret Service and handed over to the Guadalajara cartel. Gallardo's main associates were arrested. The drug lord went underground.
So one of the things the investigation did was expose the high level of corruption in Mexico in a way that had never been exposed before to the light of day.
That case revealed the widespread corruption among the Secret Service and intelligence agents. And it became clear that they were the real bosses. They were the ones who decided which drug trafficker reigned over which territory, and they earned huge sums from this drug running. It's even said that some of the money found its way all the way up to the Interior Ministry.
The DEA's investigation uncovered the best-kept secret in Mexican politics. The sole party in power since the 1930s, the PRI, maintained its grip by racketeering all kinds of economic activities, both legal and illegal. And when drug trafficking became rooted in Mexico, the country became a narco state.
Lots of people say that narco-traffic penetrated the Mexican government. But I don't think the Mexican government was penetrated by anything. Mexican narco-traffic, drug smuggling, is an integral part of the entire political system.
Basically, the state offered the men who run drug trafficking in Mexico a deal. Associate yourselves with the PRI, and we'll look after your interests. It was too good an offer to turn down. If they didn't accept, the state would crush them.
In Colombia, the truth came out at the same moment. In 1984, the new Justice Minister, Rodrigo Lara, found the courage to unmask Pablo Escobar.
Colombia tiene de su parte de compromiso en la droga porque es un país utilizado como punto de tráfico, como centro de procesamiento y como sitio de producción.
In Parliament, Rodrigo Lara publicly accused Escobar of being a drug trafficker.
El señor ministro de Justicia tiene un plazo de 24 horas para que presente las pruebas concretas de la sindicación que me hizo en el día de ayer en la Cámara de Representantes.
Too sure of himself, Escobar had forgotten one detail. An old case resurfaced when a reporter from the popular daily El Espectador discovered in the newspaper's archives an article that had appeared in 1976. The young Pablo Escobar arrested in possession of 19 kilos of cocaine.
For the first time, we had solid proof that Pablo Escobar, who couldn't be accused or indicted for anything through lack of proof, was heavily involved in drug trafficking. In a surprising move, Congress removed his parliamentary immunity, and Escobar was forced to go underground. He would never be an official politician, nor an official drug trafficker.
Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara embarked on a crusade. He grounded Escobar's planes and demolished his labs in the jungle.
He launched a suicidal hunt for Escobar, and in doing so signed his own death warrant.
On April 30th, 1984 in Bogota, Rodrigo Lara was shot by a teenage assassin employed by the Medellin cartel. It was a declaration of war. The Colombian president hit back by ratifying the dormant extradition treaty with Washington. Pablo Escobar entrenched himself in Medellin, protected by the population, for whom he constructed homes, schools, and soccer stadiums. He recruited an army of 2,000 teenagers. These new henchmen got rid of anyone who threatened Escobar's reign: journalists, judges, policemen, and politicians. Despite the danger, the Justice Department continued to gather evidence against the boss of the Medellin cartel in preparation for his extradition. In 1985, Escobar made a pact with the Marxist guerrilla group M19, which led an assault on the Palace of Justice in Bogota. Pablo Escobar's case file was destroyed. After a 2-day siege, the Palace of Justice went up in flames. For drug lords, dabbling in politics is usually highly beneficial. Playing on their Robin Hood image as defenders of the poor and victims of a repressive state, they enjoy strong popular support. And the more they're attacked by the state, the stronger they become. Deep within the Golden Triangle, Kunsar was the perfect example of this phenomenon. In the early 1980s, the region's geopolitics changed radically. China had opened itself up to other nations, peace returned, and the Kingdom of Thailand no longer needed its troublesome allies. Serving no further purpose, the King of Heroin was chased out of the country and sought refuge in his homeland of Burma. Kunsar set up his new laboratories in Shan State without the slightest opposition from the Burmese dictatorship.
He must have paid money to Myanmar army commanders in the region. It's hard to find evidence for that, of course, but I think if you look at how things have developed over the years, it makes a lot of sense that some arrangements were there.
He had tried to form relationships with the Burmese army generals, commanders, and they kept on being friends.
The Burmese military dictatorship was one of the most repressive in the world. After 20 years in power, the generals had impoverished the country and provoked uprisings by dozens of minorities. By allying themselves with Khun Sa, they purchased peace in Shan State, which represented a quarter of Burma. Khun Sa offered them that which counted most in their eyes, stability in a region that had been in constant rebellion.
Khun Sa did something extraordinary. He gradually, by assassinating rival leaders, by using basically the threat of death, he forced the Shan, the fragmented Shan movement, to increasingly respect him as the leader. And he built an armed force of 20,000 men.
Like we would say that having a big army is not to fight. I have a big army because I don't want to fight. If I have a small army, the Burmese would always try to search me and then try to eliminate me.
The Burmese army would not attack Khun Sa, and Khun Sa could continue to present himself as the great defender of his people, the Shan, all the while keeping his factories ticking around the clock. Khun Sa flooded the heroin market by selling his drugs cut price. In 1980s Europe, syringes passed from arm to arm. Addiction and AIDS spread, sowing the seeds of death.
In about 1981, Burma was producing around 500 tons of opium a year. By 1989, it was producing 2,500 tons, a 500% increase, one of the most rapid increases in opium production up to that point in history, probably, as far as we know, the most rapid increase.
Thousands of kilometers away in Sicily, to attack Cosa Nostra godfather Toto Riina, the most fearless investigating magistrates joined forces in an anti-mafia pool, alongside the two charismatic figures of Paolo Borsellino and Giovanni Falcone.
Pensez-vous qu'un jour, nous verrons la fin de la mafia? Je crois que nous ne la verrons ni vous ni moi.
One day he said this to me. You know, Giuseppe, drugs leave no trace. You have to catch someone red-handed, otherwise you get nothing. But money does leave traces. So it was obvious we had to attack the mafia's bank accounts.
They started looking into their cash flows, and Falcone, even before there was anti-money laundering legislation, tried to track dirty money and hit the mafiosis' wallets. He carried out detailed financial investigations, which also taught him a great deal about how financial markets, banking systems, and banking secrecy worked.
Judge Falcone tracked the money to the tax havens of Switzerland, Panama, and Guernsey, and initiated more than 20,000 banking investigations. Falcone's method then followed the money across the Atlantic to the United States, where he worked closely with the FBI to unravel the pizza connection.
Since there had never been any investigations of this kind before, mafiosi wrote checks with impunity. I saw checks for 1 billion lira going through because they were untroubled. Nobody had ever looked into the banks.
In 1983, a leading figure in Cosa Nostra, Tommaso Buscetta, was arrested in Brazil. The totally unexpected occurred when he broke the mafia code of Omerta.
He was the victim of brutal repression by Totorina, who killed pretty much his whole family. He found himself alone, and as revenge, he would reveal all the secret inner workings of Cosa Nostra to Judge Falcone.
Tommaso Buscetta's statements speeded up Falcone and the FBI's financial investigations. A wave of arrests led to the two biggest trials ever to implicate the mafia, the Maxi trial in Palermo and that of the Pizza Connection. In Sicily, 450 suspects were indicted. After the 2-year trial, the court gave its verdict: 360 prison sentences amounting to a collective total of 2,500 years. Totorina, who was on the run, was sentenced to life. In New York, at the trials of the Pizza Connection, bosses and their associates also tumbled.
We never seized a single gram of heroin. Everything was reconstructed thanks to international cooperation and money transfers. Without Falcone, the whole investigation would never have been seen through.
Thanks to Falcone, the terms money laundering and offshore accounts entered into common usage. The Italian magistrate had found the fatal weapon that could bring down drug trafficking, tracking money to where it was stashed, in the banks.
It frightens the drug traffickers way more than some of their leadership being killed. If we're talking about money laundering, the international market is where serious blows can be dealt.
Drug trafficking is targeted through money laundering, but money laundering stretches much further than drugs. Everything is in place for cash to flow as freely as possible. There is a financial deregulation which allows more fluid movement of people and merchandise. But each state is free to make itself a tax haven or not, to have a tax system or to employ specific banking secrecy.
But in those first years of financial globalization, no state could allow itself to change the foundations of its system. Reagan returned to the old methods of force and diplomacy. In 1988 in Mexico, Felix Gallardo was dropped by the men in power. But from his prison cell, the trafficker dissolved his cartel and split up his territories among his young guns. All trace was lost of what was once an easily identifiable organization. From then on, each border post was controlled by a new cartel. Washington would only realize this much later. In 1989, a few weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the United States invaded Panama and brought down its dictator, Manuel Noriega, an ally of the CIA and of the drug traffickers. In the war on drugs, America freed itself of its Cold War logic. In Colombia, the rumor of a military intervention by Washington made the headlines. Pablo Escobar didn't want to end up in an American jail. If they wanted his head, they would have to collect it from a mountain of corpses. As long as the government refused to annul the extradition treaty, not a single street corner would be safe. After a series of blind attacks, Escobar had 4 presidential candidates killed. The favorite for election, Luis Carlos Galán, was assassinated during a public debate. He was replaced by his campaign manager, César Gaviria, who luckily escaped an attempt on his life.
Still today, it's hard to grasp the difficulty of the challenges that faced us back then. The complicity, for example, among the law enforcement agencies, the police, the army, in the deaths of certain public figures. Why do I say that? Because when you see complicity like that, you realize what little control we had over the country. The cartels had turned Colombia into a living hell.
Elected President Cesar Gaviria held one of the most dangerous positions in the world. To stop the carnage, he negotiated the conditions for peace with Pablo Escobar. In exchange for his arrest, he promised to revise the constitution and withdraw the extradition treaty.
It was a massive challenge. We needed to find a response which was not authoritarian but democratic to a crisis of terrifying violence.
On June the 19th, 1991, the boss of the Medellin cartel surrendered to the authorities. On the wall of the living room of his prison cell, which had been decorated to his taste, Pablo Escobar proudly displayed his DEA arrest warrant.
For Colombia, denounce the narco-traffickers. Wanted, Pablo Escobar Gaviria. Reward, 2,700,000 pesos.
But Escobar didn't stay long in his bunkered palace. He soon realized he was losing control of the drug traffic and organized his escape. His competitors and associates who had taken advantage of his absence would join forces to bring him down. The mobsters decided to cooperate with the police. With the help of their killers and informants, the manhunt made rapid progress.
They took a massive risk, and it's something I still question today regarding the war on drugs. That to rid itself of a single trafficker, the state allied itself to all of his enemies.
On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar was shot dead on a Medellin rooftop. It took the combined efforts of all parties, the DEA, the Colombian police force, and the drug traffickers, to finally bring down the biggest cocaine trafficker in the world. On May the 25th, 1992, all Italy was in mourning. Inside the church, the voice of a woman spoke out.
A nome di tutti coloro che hanno dato la vita per lo Stato. Chiedo innanzitutto che venga fatta giustizia, adesso, rivolgendomi agli uomini della mafia, perché ci sono qua dentro. Io vi perdono, però mi dovete mettere in ginocchio. Se avete il coraggio di cambiare, loro non cambiano.
Avete il coraggio?
Di cambiare. Oh,
In the coffins, the bodies of Giovanni Falcone, his wife, and 3 members of his police escort, all blown to bits by a bomb. For this tragic crime, the crowd blamed the political system, which had always protected Cosa Nostra.
Dès qu'un élu apparaît, c'est la tornade.
In turn, Judge Paolo Borsellino would also die in a car bomb attack.
On
We're still waiting for answers. There are things that have never been revealed, archives that have never been made public. But one thing is clear. In the assassinations of Falcone and Borsellino, regarding the quantity of the explosives, it would have been impossible for the mafia, even with all its contacts, to have acquired such a large amount without leaving some kind of trace. So there are a lot of grey areas.
The FBI investigators who were close to the two Italian judges arrived, bringing support and brand new technology. For the first time in Europe, DNA samples were collected from the crime scenes. More than 1,000 people were arrested. Toto Riina's tactics were turning against him. Betrayed by his own men, the boss of bosses was jailed in 1993 and would die behind bars 25 years later. Cosa Nostra was weakened by the arrests and by the statements of reformed mafiosi. The Sicilian mafia was eradicated from the drugs network and became invisible. For Cosa Nostra, the age of the drug lords ended here. Only one drug lord remained in place, Khun Sa. But the king of heroin had just crossed the red line. In 1993, he declared the independence of Shan State. The military regime instantly sent their forces against him. Khun Sa had no other option than to negotiate his surrender.
Without a shot fired, Burmese troops dominated Khun Sa's capital.
In 1996, the dethroned king of heroin was granted a peaceful retirement surrounded by friends and family.
Here he was, arguably the most powerful single drug lord ever. And yet, once he fell from power, the downfall of history's most powerful drug lord had very little impact on the traffic.
The era of the drug lords raised narco-trafficking to a level equivalent to that of mass retailing. The heroin and cocaine businesses account for the same portion of the global economy as textiles. Only an optimist could believe that the drug lords' demise would bring an end to the problem, because a third generation was preparing to take up the baton.